The Bliss Business Podcast, the show about empathy, connection, and consciousness in business. Today's episode is brought to you by Zero Company, your paid search, social media, and programmatic ad experts.
Welcome back to the show, everyone. I'm Steven Sakach here again with my co-host Tullio, Siragusa, and our special guest today. So according to Talent Smart, emotional intelligence accounts for nearly 60% of performance across a wide range of jobs. And when leaders strengthen this capability, collaboration improves, conflict becomes more productive, and people are more willing to engage. So today we're exploring how emotional intelligence shows up in business and how leaders can build it into the way they work every day. Tullio, introduce our guest today.
Yes, happy to. Joining us today is a leader who truly knows the Zoomin Groomin brand from the ground up. Josh Fitzgerald entered the system as a franchisee in 2023 and quickly established a reputation for building strong operations and developing talent. His hands-on success led him to join the corporate support team in 2024, where he worked to strengthen the entire network while simultaneously expanding his own portfolio to 5 locations. In August 2025, Josh took the helm as CEO, and he joins us today to discuss how emotional intelligence shapes culture, strengthens relationships, and helps businesses perform at a higher level. Josh, welcome to the Bliss Business Podcast. We're excited to have you.
Oh, thank you guys so much. I really do appreciate your time. Kind of like you guys have said, so many of the loyalty brands have already done this show, and they were all giving me a real hard time that I waited so long. So I'm glad to jump in and get it going.
Well, we love loyalty brands. They're kind of infused with kind of the stuff that we're talking about. So we're making sure we're spreading the good word on you guys. And Josh and I were talking before the show. My dog is getting groomed in about an hour. And this is probably the last grooming session we're going to have before we move up north into Washington area. And so he's already given me the hookup on the groomer up there for our dog. So I appreciate that, Josh.
No, absolutely. And I'm really excited to talk about, emotional intelligence in general. But yeah, like I said, after the show, I'll give you specifics on how to reach out to her, but she's phenomenal. But emotional intelligence, it's so important to me in general. And I don't know that I would have called it emotional intelligence until the last few years when that term kind of became a little bit more popular. But I've been very fortunate to be raised by parents the way that I was, and around the support system that I've always had, that it was very important to control your thoughts, control what you're saying and doing, and be so thoughtful of those around you. And the only real regret I have involving it is that I don't do the best all the time at doing it. And as I grow and learn and get older, hopefully I continue to get better in that regard. But as far as the bottom line, as far as I'm concerned, technical skills can get you really far in life, and they can get you in a position of leadership for sure. But I think the metric that's going to determine how successful your leadership time is what level of emotional intelligence you achieve.
Yeah, from where you sit, like, what does that look like, in kind of the daily life, as a leader?
Yeah, so I mean, emotional intelligence, I think for me, the easiest way to describe it is kind of guiding your emotions versus your emotions guiding you, and making sure that they're always in check and that they're not necessarily interfering with the facts, right? And then the other side of it is, how much does it impact others around you, and then kind of weighing the risk versus reward regarding that. And I think it really impacts us quite a bit in our daily lives. It can affect our tone. It can affect the way we approach a conversation. It can affect so many different things in real time. And that's the ones that are really good at it. The ones that, maybe they're jumped right in the middle of a conversation, and they can tell by your facial expressions if they should adjust how they're talking or what they're doing. That's the people like John Hewitt and Bob Gappa and those guys that have made, loyalty kind of what it is. Because I mean, the reality of it is there's a difference between, people don't respond the same way to things, and it's up to us as leaders to adjust to them. It's not fair of us to just expect that we can say whatever we want and it'll just be, translated the way it should be in their ears. That's not a very fair way to go about it. Certainly when your words hold as much weight as they can as a leader. And so that's a responsibility I take really seriously. And, John takes it very seriously. And when he's talking and when he's doing the things that he does, it's very impressive watching him adjust as he's in the middle of conversations. He's just so prepared, and he's so well-versed in like how people are going to take what he has to say. And I think that's probably the biggest way that it impacts our day-to-day, but just the idea of being responsive instead of reactive is really important. And, responding to something takes time, and it takes thoughtfulness and purpose, an intention behind it. And reacting to something tends to be more instinctual, which sometimes can be good. I mean, instincts aren't always bad, I suppose. But you have a lot better of a chance of saying something impulsive that could be damaging to a relationship or to a culture or to a decision, whatever have you, if you didn't put any thought into it. And I think that pause when you get brought, the 15th fire for the day, or
we all know that pause,
or you get brought some really, really bad news or some really maybe frustrating news. Taking that moment to pause and be self-aware that the person that's bringing you that news likely is the messenger. Likely they're not the ones that caused it. And if they are, they likely didn't mean to. And, me reacting poorly, or because trust me, I want to sometimes, like that's the rub of it all, right? We don't always want to do the right thing. And taking that moment to pause, I think that's really what separates someone who's highly emotionally intelligent and someone that, just doesn't quite get it yet.
EQ, I often think about it as really it's an expression of wisdom, because there's so much involved. Like you mentioned, self-awareness, being able to regulate your emotion, seeing beyond the issue that there's a human being on the other side, what they're going through, what they're experiencing. What's it like for them to express the concern or the issue, or to even admit something went wrong? There's so much to it. And it does require a certain level of caring for others. In fact, it really is all about caring for others. What does it look like when it's missing? What have you seen, either how it impacts teams or even with customers? Because a lot of companies don't often see the correlation between not just how you're dealing with employees, but how it translates to how customers perceive your brand or your company when the leadership team or the employees lack that EQ. What have you seen when that's missing? What happens? Where does it go wrong? What's the telltale signs that something's off from your experience?
Yeah, I think, it's funny being the last one in loyalty to come and do this. I don't know how much I'm going to end up repeating myself. Something that they've said, but we're big readers over here at Loyalty. We do a lot of group reading. We read a lot of books about leadership, and which is funny to me because we probably have 2 or 3 of the greatest business leaders that have ever done it, and even they're pushing books of different authors to us as they're trying to still learn. So one of my favorite authors is Joe Batten, and he authored Tough-Minded Leadership, and he talks about in there kind of to what you were just talking to about how important it is to keep in mind the people in which that are around you, that they're people, and your motivation behind correction or your motivation behind accountability really does need to be a kindness and a respect, because you respect them enough to want them to get better. You want to be kind enough to them for them not to fail. And you have to care about them enough for them not to fail. And I think that when you don't have that, you have a breakdown in trust. And at the end of the day, all the way from, CEO down to VP, all the way down to your clients and your customers, if there's not a trust level there, then there's going to be a serious breakdown. And, we talk a lot at Loyalty about our imperatives. We have 3. We believe having happy and successful franchisees, opening locations, and creating fanatical fans. And so, it's funny. We're so focused on our fans, our clients, our customers at Loyalty that was the first thing I thought of when you asked that was, how is it going to affect our customers? We want to impact their lives the best we can. And I think that, there's certainly a trickle down or a ripple or a domino effect of it all. that if from the leadership roles, if there's not that trust level for them with their employees, down to their franchisees, down to, all the way down till you get to that dog or that cat, the customers are going to be ultimately the ones that suffer from it. And you're going to see that. I mean, it's going to be a very measurable metric. You're going to see your ratings are going to drop, your retention rates are going to drop, your rebooking rates are going to drop, tip percentage is going to go down. I mean, all those things that we look at day to day to kind of measure, hey, are we actually satisfying our clients past, just the ones that may leave Google reviews and whatnot, so I would say, when you don't have those things in place and those practices in place, there's a serious mistrust that happens. And the problem with mistrust is when you make decisions, no one cares to listen. They don't think that's the right one.
I love some of the metrics you mentioned, because there's often the belief you can't measure the impact of EQ, and it's the furthest thing from the truth. There's actually quite a bit of studies now that support significant measurable impact that you have, and also the opposite when you don't have it. So talking about some of the signals of what could go wrong when you don't have it, your metrics go down, the client satisfaction scores, all those things. What are some of the key and conversely, what are some of the behaviors that signal strong EQ from your point of view? Like, what do you look for in terms of franchisees or employees and others in terms of their strong signal that they have good EQ? What are some of the key things you look for?
I break my own rule a lot with this. Ironically, it's something that I'm very aware of, but I tend to be more retroactively aware after I've done it wrong. But you don't have to always fill the void. You don't always have to talk. When somebody asks you a question, if you don't know the answer, or you're unsure, or you think there might be a better answer, it's okay to pause. Not very many adult, particularly professional adult conversations, are you going to get laughed at because you're thinking too much in the conversation, or you're going to get judged for being too much of a thinker. In fact, in our world, that's the key to it all, is being a thinker. And I think people that are in this world and when you're at a business dinner, or you're at a meeting or a strategy meeting, and somebody asks something and you take a few minutes to pause and say, or even, I'm not sure. Let me think. I'd like to think a little more on that before I give you an answer. I think that's okay. And I think having that moment of self-reflection in real time is a really big indicator that this person is at least very self-aware, which a lot of times can be interchangeable with emotional intelligence. And the other part of it is seeing people in not great situations, right? So back to Bat, I'm going to talk about Batten as much as you'll let me. He's my favorite author, and he talks a lot about standing for your values, standing for your morals, and how important it is that you and your company stand by them, no matter the cost, whether that cost is money, whether that cost is comfortability, whatever have you. And so when somebody's in a bad situation, how strong do they hold on to their stated values? Can you trust that their stated values are real to them? If they are, then what do their decisions look like in regards to that? And as they're going along in those decisions, do you think they would like to be talked to the way they're talking? And one of my big ways, and this is going to sound a little presumptuous, and I apologize for that, but when you're dealing with a lot of C-suite people, like I don't particularly have an assistant, but a lot of executives do. And when you're around them and their assistants, and how do they talk to people that, traditionally speaking, might not always be spoken to the right way, might not be spoken to in the right amount of respect. How do they speak to them? And, that's something that the John Hewitts and the Bob Gappas have taught me, is that, there's not a person that you're going to encounter that doesn't deserve your respect. And, maybe you caught them on a bad day. That's hard to say, but if that's the perspective you're allowed to have in that moment, then that's unfortunate. But that's part of having emotional intelligence, is being aware that others are around and listening, and being careful that you're you are actually putting yourself in other people's shoes and kind of having as much empathy as you can regarding your decisions and what you're saying to them.
You know,
I'm sorry, Steve. I love what you
go for
often say. You often say, leave your trauma, use a different word, but leave your trauma. You leave your trauma at home. Please don't bring your trauma with you at home to work as a leader. Leave it at home. No one needs to deal with your trauma. So work on it, but don't bring it to the office.
You got to work on that because, you know, there's this generational trauma, right, that just gets passed down from parents to you know, children. The same sort of thing happens at work sometimes, is that almost like that generational trauma can be passed down and people don't need to deal with that. So yeah, it's like, you know, do a little work on yourself. Hey Josh, so I want to switch and talk a little bit about building culture and systems and stuff for that. So, you know, great cultures, they rarely happen by accident. You know, studies show that managers drive about 70% of team engagement. So thinking about that, what kind of systems or leadership routines or practices help kind of emotional intelligence become consistent at Zoomin Groomin? What comes to mind when you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, immediately, communication in general is massive. And then kind of the caveat of communication is feedback. And, you know, how are we communicating? How often are we communicating? Is it predictable? Do your employees expect it, or do they only expect to hear from you when something's wrong? Do they only expect to hear from you when you're bragging? You know, what does that communication look like? And I think it's really important that it is predictable. I think that you should have time set aside to communicate, whether that's a time like, you know, every Tuesday at 5:30, we sit down and talk. I think that's important. Or like there could be something that happens that causes communication every time. That's not necessarily good or bad. It's just, hey, when this happens, we're going to debrief at the end of every strategy meeting, whenever that is, stuff like that. But I do think it needs to be flexible enough to still kind of meet everybody's needs and keep everybody involved. I wouldn't want anyone on the team.
Yeah, I like that thought of the predictable communication, you know, especially we were just talking about trauma, right? You don't want that communication to be, oh no, here comes, you know, HQ again. There come. What did we do wrong this time, right?
What do you want now? Yeah.
What do they want now?
Hope no one says that when they see my email come across. But,
but like you said, having that predictable sort of cadence and stuff, it is less. Well, it should be less traumatic because of that, I would think.
Yeah, and I think it needs to be two ways. I don't think it's fair for me to sit in a meeting, or anyone to sit in a meeting and just continuously talk down. And on one-on-one conversations, even less appropriate, in my opinion. You know, it needs to be a two-way street. There needs to be back and forth. I think it's only fair. I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but it's only fair that it's adjusted to the individual's or the group's communication style. You know, as leaders, we take on a lot of things that, you know, we wouldn't expect our employees to take over and to take the responsibility of. And I think that's probably one of the more important ones, is that, you know, you need to know your team well enough to know how to speak to them. Because production and being unproductive in a meeting like that, you're not helping your business, you're not helping yourself, you're not helping them as people. You're literally wasting your time in general. And I just think that's really important. And kind of like what we both were saying a few minutes ago, it just needs to be purposeful and it needs to be intended. It can't be, you know, every time Josh talks to me, he's just mad, or every time Josh talks to me, it's because I didn't meet a metric, or I didn't hit sales, or I didn't hit whatever. And then when we're talking, you know, stability in general, and that's kind of what I'm getting at when it comes to keeping them predictable. You know, stability in just about every area in life makes you feel safer. It makes you feel, you know, like on a bridge, for example, like if it's not moving as you cross it, you generally feel better about being on the bridge, right? Same concept, in my opinion. It's the idea that you're safe, you're okay, I care about you, I took time to make sure that you're okay. I want to know how you feel, I want to know what you think. And hopefully, you know, the last 6 months of us working together has shown you that I care, and I want to know what you have to say. And then about feedback, you know, feedback is so important, because without it, no one gets better. And most people in general want to get better. Like nobody wants to do a bad job. That's no one sets out their day or their life thinking, oh, I want to be the worst ever at anything. That's not people's goal. And so, when it is critical, when there are critical feedbacks to be given, I think it's important that it's private. And I think it's between the leader and the person that the criticism rather needs to go to. I think when it's affirming, it needs to be relatively public. I think there's something to be said for maybe not like, posting on our corporate Facebook page how great of a job somebody did in the office, but I think certainly, mentioning it in a group meeting, a shout out, maybe a letter of recognition, something like that. It makes a lot of sense. And I think that it's really important that when you're giving feedback, you're not being accusatory so much. And you're more curious, you're asking questions and not just to get by the way. And I think that's kind of the big thing with this. And that's something that John has taught me, and Bob Gappa have taught me quite a bit, is that, it's not enough to do these things just because they work better. Like you really do need to be curious as to why they did what they did. And you need to learn, because if you can't understand that they weren't trying to do wrong, it's going to be really hard to adjust yourself.
Yeah, unfortunately, a lot of leaders still struggle with the idea that their role isn't to supervise and test and be the ones that have all the answers. What makes you better than those other individuals? There's almost this level of almost being obnoxious to think, because I'm the boss, I'm supposed to know better. But when you create more collaboration, more openness, you can find a solution together. You can point out, here's what happened. How do we work through it? How do we work through it instead of how do you work through it? So I'm curious, because pressure always tests leadership, right? I mean, let's get real for a second. You got quarterly numbers. If you're a public company, you've got pressure from investors, you've got franchisees pressuring you. There's a lot of pressure that can happen. And that's just the reality of it. And it can test even the best of leadership. Are there any systems that you guys have adopted that have had the greatest cultural impact, that it helps people stay grounded when situations become stressful? Love to hear those.
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with just practice, doing it many times over. But in reference to the, trying to be as prepared as possible in life is really important, let alone, when you're leading a company or a group of people. But it goes so much farther than just knowing your data or knowing your material or your plans. I think you need to prepare your mindset. I think you need to prepare your emotional state. I think you need to prepare yourself to, as you're walking into situations and days, even that you're constantly reminding yourself to stay aware of those around you and how what you're saying can affect them. It kind of goes back, to earlier when I talked about responding versus reacting. We're humans, right? Everyone here is a human, and everyone here is, they're going to get frustrated. They're going to do, they're going to have bad moments. And it's less likely to happen, though, if you've prepped for it. If you've gone into your day knowing, like, I'm going to end up in this meeting. This is what's going to happen. I need to, no matter what's said to me, I need to understand that there's a productive way to respond, and pausing, like I talked earlier, in those moments and thinking through your decisions. As far as other systems go too, journaling is a really big thing for me. I've as a younger man, I would not have said that very often. But the journaling of it all and systematically going back into my journal and reviewing myself has been exceptionally helpful in this regard. It's real easy to notice that phrase, hindsight's 2020. It makes a lot of sense when you start actually looking back. You say you journal for a week, and then on Friday evening, you kind of go back and you look through your week. It's real easy to see your blind spots. It's real easy to see, oh, I'm really biased when it comes to expansion. I'm really biased when it comes to, any metric that we're focused on. And I've really kind of ignored this side of the business. And, being, I guess I don't like saying being humble enough, because I don't know that humble is the right word, but just being self-aware enough to be critical of yourself. And, some people are not always going to be nice about it, but there's usually truth to some degree in a complaint about you. Finding that truth, determining if it's true or not, and if you need to apply it to yourself. But the journaling, I think, is a big part of it all. And I think that preparation in general really helps in that regard too.
I think that's a good
humble
advice.
is the right word. I was going to say, I think that is the right word.
That is absolutely the right word. And you know what I love about journaling? Not everybody's ready for like a coach, because to do that, you have to be a certain level of humility, because someone's going to tell you something straight up that you may not like, right? They're going to tell you the truth that you may not like. And that's the job, right? They're almost like an angel in your life, mirroring things that you might be blind to. But the beautiful thing about journaling is that you get to coach yourself. You read it from your point of view, and then it's a lot easier to digest it.
You had a practice, right? I think it was you, Tullio, where you looked at how you could have been more empathetic during the day.
Yeah, I have this thing at the end of every day. I will rewind the day and look for where were there opportunities where I missed, because we're human. We're not always going to get it right. And then what I do is I'll look at that situation and then imagine what that felt like for the other person, like taste what it was like to be them. And then imagine how I could have responded differently, and imagine the experience they would have had. So I'm able to reconstruct that whole experience and leave it on a positive note. And by doing that, I'm reprogramming my mind to create that experience. So in the future, when that situation comes up, I know how to create a better outcome because I've practiced it. So it's like an audit that I do every day. And it's just a nice way to go to sleep peaceful too, because you just let go of whatever you're holding on to. Some of us beat ourselves up when we don't respond in a nice way or a kind way, because we really are devoted to it. But, that imperfection comes in and it creeps out and you're like, man, I wish I didn't say that. So this is a practice that I've been doing for many years, and it works very well too.
All right. We've got an audience question. Let's go to that. So this is from LinkedIn user. How do you stay connected to frontline reality now that your scope is broader as CEO?
Is that Bob Gappa? That seems like something he would ask me. I have a bit of a cheat code in that regard. I do still own my franchises. I am still very involved in my day-to-day operations here in Columbus, Ohio. Our CRM has a lot of reporting features, and it talks about like it breaks it down percentages on who's scheduling what percentage of our appointments and who responds the most to text messages and stuff. So even though I do have a manager and I do have a great support system with my wife and my family, including my mother even helps quite a bit. I am still the most responsive on our CRM, and I do still do the most scheduling. It's easy for someone like me, and this is the reason I think that's funny. That's definitely something Bob would ask me. I'm not the type of CEO that says I'm not an operations guy, because I thoroughly love operations. I think that operations are a ton of fun. I love figuring out what works and what doesn't work. It's a great challenge. I'm super competitive, and I love the idea that I can help build something great that works really well. And then you flip that around, and also I love the broader sense they're talking about of growth and being thoughtful of the future, and how I can impact more people in this role than I could before, which is kind of the main reason I was so excited to take the role. That's certainly how I stay connected. I do things like I have phone calls with groomers that are all over the country randomly. I reach out to them. I reach out to franchisees in general, because even though I am living it every day, I certainly don't feel that my perspective is the only one. people in Texas are going to feel differently about certain things than I do. People that are older than me or younger than me will feel differently than I do about certain processes and certain statements and certain ideas. So there's a lot of communication from the top down where, my support staff is great and they do a really good job staying connected with our franchisees. And, I take it as an opportunity to jump in on those calls a lot. Sometimes it helps that I'm there. Sometimes it's not great that I'm there because people don't always act the same way as they would without me being there. But, the great thing, I have a lot of cheat codes in that regard. And that's kind of really what it boils down to is, my role in corporate before I became the CEO was, Newsy support. And I was a Newsy support from June 24 till August 25. And that's the biggest amount of growth we've had in our company was that time. And so, I already have this connection to a really large percentage of our franchisees that, they trusted me as someone to train them and teach them how to do certain things. And, my only goal in those classes and those seminars was just make sure I didn't point them in the wrong direction. But, so me having that perspective is relatively simple.
Nice. All right.
Yeah, go ahead, Tullio.
We always ask all of our guests a question about the role purpose plays in what they do every day. McKinsey has actually found that employees who experience purpose at work show higher levels of engagement and resilience. It's been a proven methodology. Like, why are we here? What's our purpose beyond profits? So how does that drive you as a leader in terms of how emotional intelligence has helped you live your purpose consistently? What is that? What does that look like?
So, as far as a business purpose, that's real easy for me to go off of. And, our mission statements are very important to us at Loyalty. And, for Zoomin Groomin, our mission statement is pampering paws and enriching lives. Loyalties is, having fun, improving lives. And, as the CEO of Zoomin Groomin, I have the opportunity to touch so many lives in a positive way. And it's been really easy. Things like, we pay our groomers really well. And I look at, my manager, for example, and how much her life has changed since coming on board with us. And, she has a young family and work-life balance is really important to us as a company. And she gets to spend all this great time with her young children and with her husband, and then also gets to make a great living. Just bought their first house a couple months ago. And, she was crying when her and I were talking about it, her and my wife and I. And, like she says that if she hadn't found us the way that we did, that wouldn't have happened. And that was great. And when I became the CEO, I realized I could do that all across the country now. And I could be impactful to thousands, maybe tens of thousands of people once we get big enough. And so the business answer to me seems really simple. It's, my purpose is growth. My purpose is impacting lives with that growth. It's a medium to our goal of making people's lives better. From a personal standpoint, I look at my family quite a bit. I have 4 children. I have 12-year-old twins, a 10-year-old and an 8-year-old, a beautiful wife, a loving set of parents and in-laws. And I think a lot about, whenever my time's up, and, my family, my children, if my wife is still there, whatever's going on, when they're looking at my life, are they proud of me? And do they feel like I impacted the world, whatever the amount of the world around me is? Did I impact that positively? Did I teach them how important hard work was? Did I teach them how important empathy is, and to understand that no matter your situation, there's people that are worse off and we need to take care of them? Stuff like that. And I think that motivates me pretty hard because, while I do have, a number of franchisees, we have 300 vans on the road today. A number of people watching me from Zoomin Groomin's perspective. I have 4 little ones watching me at a level that is relatively intense sometimes. So, I really do want to make sure that at the end of the day, I make them proud. And, when you have that sort of purpose, that the idea is whatever we can do to help people, and then, profits and numbers and revenue and all that stuff will just kind of come with that. It's going to connect with your people. And as it connects with your people, it will connect with their people and their clients and their groomers and their managers and stuff like that. And it's really important to me that that I'm a part of that in a positive way. Because if I'm known as the CEO of Zoomin Groomin that ruined our culture, that is not going to be a fun time for me.
Yeah, no, I don't think that's going to happen. No, I mean, this is why we talk about Bliss on this show. Build love into scalable systems. It's trying to build those systems of kindness so that, like you said, when you're gone from something, this helps you build kind of that legacy in a way, and all those lives that you touch, you can have this massive impact, especially in that franchise situation. So this is the question we always ask every guest on the show, is some form of this, is what role does love play in business for you?
I think it kind of all goes back to the golden rule type concept. I'm from the South. I'm from Virginia, Southeast Virginia, like the little part that sticks out in the ocean. That's Hampton Roads. That's where I'm from. And, relatively conservative background regarding that, growing up in church and whatnot. And, if there's one thing that I took from all of that was, how important it was to treat people the way that I want to be treated. And there's nothing I can think of better than being loved, genuinely loved, beyond like attraction and all that stuff, but unconditionally loved. And, the idea that kind of no matter what we go through, what we do as a group or as a person, I'm still going to respect you. I'm still going to love you. I'm still going to treat you like I would want to be treated. And so in business, I think it's relatively simple. If I wouldn't want to hear the person across the table saying it to me, then I really try to avoid it. And I mean, I suppose that's the difficult part though, is in those meetings, in those negotiations, in those strategy dinners and all that stuff. Sometimes it's hard to not speak quickly. I mentioned earlier how I break my rule about filling the void a lot. Definitely fair share of putting my foot in my mouth. Ask John next time you talk to him. But the idea of Batten talks a lot about that also, is that, if you don't love your people, if you don't have a love for humans, then being a CEO, being a leader in general is probably not the best space for you.
It's true. It's true. I love everything you said. You spoke of the golden rule, and being someone, you're probably very familiar with this from the gospel, where it said, this I think is the ultimate expression of emotional intelligence, which is to treat others as if they're superior to you. Mm-hmm. Could you imagine if we all acted that way? We'd have no problems. So for today, we want to give some tips to those who might be watching, something that they can take away, something that they can practice this month. What would that be? Like for leaders who want to strengthen their emotional intelligence, what's one practical step they can take this month that you would recommend that they can take action on?
I think the first thing I would say is find resources that teach it. There's a million books out there from very intelligent people that spent their lives dedicating themselves to how to lead people the right way. I 34 years old. I've been leading for some time overall, but there's people like John Hewitt out there that have been doing it for 60, 70 years. So certainly read and learn something no matter what you read, whether that's what you should be doing or shouldn't be doing. There's always something to gain from that. And the other thing is, I would encourage everyone to journal, whether that's a mental journal, a physical journal. I think physically journaling makes more sense and is better for people. But even if you just take the time to consider the last week you had, how you could have done better, how you could have, to your point, been more empathetic. I think those things are the low hanging fruit of it all. I think those are the fastest and easiest ways to get a little bit more emotionally intelligent. And then once you figure out the rest, give me a call and let me know so I can kind of get on board with you.
Awesome. So thanks for being with us, John. For those who want to learn more about you and your work, where can they find you?
Zoomingroomin.com. No G's on the end of the words. ZOOMINGROOMIN.com. All the stuff's on there. And then anything else loyalty related is loyaltybrands.com as well.
Josh, thank you for joining us and sharing your perspective on emotional intelligence in business. And I loved some of your answers today. To our listeners, thank you for listening, of course, but consider how awareness and empathy influence conversations you have every day. I think Josh talked about that quite a bit, that being on the other side of that conversation on that table, kind of look through their eyes. Leadership's often less about control and more about connection. Thank you for joining us on the Bliss Business Podcast, and we'll see you next time.